Hey kids, welcome to a Scribes Scribbles. Today, I want to talk about details in your stories. Adding too much, adding too little, and their detriments, and how to figure out a way to add the perfect amount. So stick around, because we're going to talk about that. Alright, let's get into it. Every story needs details. This includes details about your characters, about the scenes, the actions. Everything needs some form of detail. And the reason that we add these details is when you're reading a story, you should be able to get enough information from the book to trigger a little miniature movie inside your head so that you can actually visualize what's going on. And a lot of readers that read for entertainment like to build the world that they're reading about and build the characters that they're reading about themselves. But they need help, they need guidance. They don't know right off the bat if your main character is male or female or an alien or aardvark. They don't know if the world is the planet Earth or some different planet, or if it's underground or in the air. So you have to provide enough details to give them the basic structure to build the movie that they get to watch while they're reading your book. And if you add too many details or not enough details, this will cause the readers to react negatively. And obviously we don't want that. But adding the right amount of detail is a tricky thing. So we're going to cover that today. But first I want to tell you why it's detrimental to not have enough detail or have too much. So what are the problems that we can have if we don't have enough details? Well, the first thing, obviously, is that if you don't have enough details, the reader can't build the world and the characters in their mind the way that they want to. So they don't really get that mental movie going on. And when I'm talking about the mental movie or the movie projector in your brain, I'm sure you've all read a book and then have seen the movie that was based on the book. And when you see the preview or you go see the movie, you see who they cast for one of the roles, and you probably thought to yourself, that doesn't fit at all. For example, one of the biggest ones for me was The Red Dragon, which was a Silence of the Lambs in that trilogy. And when the movie came out, they cast Edward Norton as the Red Dragon. Now, I love Edward Norton. He's a great actor, not taking anything away from him. But the way that the Red Dragon was described in the book versus how it was portrayed on the screen were two completely different things. I was expecting something different than what I got. So that mental movie that was in my head, the picture that I created of the Red Dragon and the whole scenes and the world that this book took place in, that really stuck out to me when I saw the movie and saw their vision, and it kind of took me aback, and it took away from the movie a little bit, to be honest with you, because every time that I had pictured this in my head of what was going on as he was walking through the door, this big lumbering hulk of a man, and then you see Edward Norton, who doesn't have to duck in the doorway or turn sideways to get through a skinny pass. It really kind of offset what I was expecting. And that's one of the problems with the details. The other thing, besides not being able to trigger the movie in the reader's mind, is that without the right amount of details, the story gets kind of boring. And it just kind of drones on. You're telling the tale, but you're not providing any extra information. And so it's like reading a textbook. Everything you need is there, but everything you want is missing. And so it becomes boring. And when a book becomes boring, a book gets closed. And as a writer, that is one of the worst things you can have happen. Likewise, if you add too many details, the book and the story then become difficult to read. It can become confusing. For example, there are some Stephen King novels out there that I have to really chew through. And while I enjoy the story and the plot lines and the characters, sometimes there's just way too many details for a particular scene or a particular character, and I often find myself skipping over those parts. There was one in particular where the main character went into a convenience store, picked some things off the shelves. He went up to the counter and he paid for the counter, had a small interaction with the cashier, and then he left. And that's all I needed to know, because that cashier was never in the story again. However, there were 3 pages worth of details about the cashier, where he came from, who his parents were, how much money was in his pocket, what kind of shoes he was wearing. And while this is all nice and good, if it's not a repeating character, I don't really need all that information. And I am a strong contributor to the fact that every character in your book should have a backstory. But I also believe that those backstories are for the writer and not the reader, and unless that character is detrimental to the plot line, your readers don't really need to know that backstory. You need to know the backstory as the writer so that you can create a more believable character. But I don't need to know which shoe is untied on a character that I'm never going to read about again. So you get to chew through all these added details that have become unnecessary, and they start becoming confusing, and now this movie in my head gets paused, it jumps ahead, it jumps back, goes into rewind, and it gets confusing, and in the end I'm going to lose interest and I'm going to close the book. So the trick, obviously, then is to add the perfect amount of detail. We don't want to add too little, we don't want to add too much, we have to have just the right amount. So our readers then become Goldilocks, and we have to provide them with everything that's just right. So how do we add details in the perfect amount? The true answer to this, and you're going to hate me, is there is no way. There's no way to know. And partly that is because of your reader base. There are readers out there that have a difficult time, no matter how well the story is written. They just cannot get that movie to turn on in their heads, and they don't read a whole lot. But when they do read, they want to enjoy the story. There are other readers out there that devour books daily, and they tend to get the mental projector going very, very quickly. So as a writer, you don't really know who your reader is going to be, which category they're going to fall into, or some mixture of the categories depending on, the story. So we go in as a writer, and what I want you to do is try not to worry about it too much. And I tell you that because if you start to worry about, do I have enough details for this scene? Is this character, fluffed out enough for the reader? It's going to take away from your storytelling ability, and then you're going to end up adding more details or taking details out that maybe should have been left in or shouldn't have been added in the first place. And when you do that, you become a character-focused story instead of the storytelling itself. And so as the reader then, I'm now following somebody instead of walking alongside them, so to speak. So there are actually many, many ways that you can get feedback or understanding of does your story have too many details? Does it not have enough? But I'm going to tell you right now that 99% of this is going to be gut feeling. And if you're that worried about it, especially your first or second, third novel that you're working on, if you're that worried about it, you're going to need feedback. You're going to need help. And the number one way to do that, obviously, is going to be with beta readers. You can get 5 to 10 to 15, however many you want. And then ask them specific questions about the detailed content. Was this scene clear enough? Did the movie projector in your mind come on? Were you able to see everything clearly? You ask these type of questions, you get the feedback, and then you can see what is common, what comes up the most often. And as we've talked about in the past with the beta readers, when you get their feedback, if one person says something and nobody else mentions it, you can pretty much toss that one away. But you're looking for the common threads. So if somebody says, hey, this scene was really confusing, and then 3 other people mention something wrong with that same scene, there's probably a problem with that scene. So if you're asking your beta readers for direct feedback about the detailed content, you want to pay attention to what keeps coming up over and over again. Another way to get this feedback is through an editor. You can hire a professional editor. If you know somebody that's a literary editor, you can ask them for assistance. And you're not really looking for the line-by-line edits here, but again, more like the beta readers, you want to know, is this scene too detail-rich? Is it not detailed enough? And things like that. And they'll be able to help you. Of course, with professional editors, it's going to cost you some money. And you will need a professional edit before the end. But if you're worried about your details before you move on to the 3rd or the 4th draft, it's okay to spend the little bit of cash that it's going to cost to get the detailed edit done. Of course, once you start submitting your novel, and if it's picked up, if it's optioned by an agent or a publisher, they're going to have people that go over and look it over, and they're going to come back and go, hey, let's cut these 4 pages down to about 1.5 pages. There's way too much going on here. They're going to tell you things like this, and it's going to be part of the process. But getting the jump on it, we want to figure out for ourselves, as we're writing, how do I know that I have enough detail? Well, I've come up with a method that I use that I've labeled. As you know me by now, I like to give everything a name. I've labeled it the addition by subtraction. And I mentioned it a little bit in this week's blog post. And I want to cover that here for you. Maybe it's something that you will want to try. But what I do is I go through whichever draft it is that I'm working on, and I pick a scene. And I remove everything in that scene that has anything to do with detail. So it's just the basic bare bones words of the scene without any detail, without any grandiose, word usage. And I read it over, I read it out loud, and that is very important because I want to make sure that without the details that the story is still there. I don't want to rely on my details to tell the story. I want my details to accentuate my story. So I take all the words out that are detail oriented and I leave behind the bare bones of the story. I read it out loud, and then as I'm reading, I find spots where the movie stops playing or the movie isn't even there in my head, and I know that that area needs detail. And then what I'll do is little by little, I'll go in and I'll add as miniature or minute amounts of detail as possible. And what I mean by that, you want to provide, again, the basic structure of this scene or your world or your character for the reader. But you don't want to give them so much detail. So for example, if I have a nightstand table that I need to incorporate into the story for whatever reason. I think in the blog I mentioned that the character was looking for his keys that were on the table. The table has to be there. It has to. If the keys are on the table and the character is looking for the keys, the table must be there. So we're going to provide that for the reader. We're going to tell them that he goes to the nightstand to look for his keys. What we don't need to do is tell them everything about this nightstand. They don't need to know that it was an antique built in 1918 off the shores of Tripoli and by a man with 3 thumbs. The scroll work was intricately done with a hand trawl. They don't need all that. They don't need that. They need to know that there's a nightstand there. And when you tell a reader, he went to the bedside table to look for his keys, in their mind, they're going to picture their own style of bedside table. It could be one with drawers and cabinets. It could be one that's just a little stool, basically. But let them decide what this bedside table looks like. So in that particular example, I don't need a ton of detail. I need to know that there is a type of table there that the keys are resting on. That's it. What it looks like is up to the reader. So if I didn't provide the table, they wouldn't know the table's there. They wouldn't be able to see one in their mind or in their little projected movie, and everything would start to fall apart or get confusing. But I also don't want to add so much detail that it takes away from what's going on in my story. I need to keep my story moving forward. And if I take time out to pause the story to tell you, the reader, what this table looks like and where it came from, unless those details are part of the story, leave them out. So I do this. So now we've taken all the words out. We've gone back through and read over what's left and decided the areas that need the details, and then we've slowly incorporated more and more details until it feels right. Until it feels like I can see what's going on in my mind, but I'm not stopping. So I want to kick on the projector, I want to see what I need to see, and I want to keep moving forward towards the next scene. And that's the main goal. And that's how I do it. Now, I don't do this every time. I don't do it for every scene or every character. Not anymore. I used to, and it used to take a lot of time, but in the end, I've trained myself as I'm writing the original drafts how many details are needed for this particular instance. And there are still times where I don't add enough, or I add too many, but overall, I tend to get it just right on the first or second try during my first few drafts, and then I don't have to worry about it. And you will get to that point as well. But until you do, you can try the addition by subtraction method, and hopefully it will work for you. If you have a method that I haven't covered, stop by the website at extradraft.com, log into your account, go to the podcast page. You'll find a link for the forum. Go to episode 13 and tell us about your particular method for making sure you have the right amount of details. I'd love to hear them. Let me know what worked for you. Have you tried something that didn't work? Tell us that too. We want to know as many options as we can. Like I said before, writers, we're all the same, but we're so different. So maybe something that works for you might work for somebody else, and maybe it won't, but we want to have that option. So stop by, let us know how you add the right amount of details to your story. Stay tuned for the newsletter that'll be coming out tomorrow. We'll give you a homework assignment to help you further expand on the addition by subtraction method. And until next week, have fun and write words.